A country where freedom is a distant dream and every corner of life is controlled by an unyielding regime. Welcome to the world of Turkmenistan. Welcome to our channel, where today we delve into one of the world's most enigmatic and oppressive regimes, Turkmenistan. From its bizarre laws to extreme human rights abuses and its reliance on natural gas wealth to maintain power, Turkmenistan stands as one of the last true totalitarian states. In this video, we'll uncover the dark realities of a nation that is ruled by a hereditary dictatorship, where fear and control shape every aspect of daily life. Turkmenistan, a small and obscure country in Central Asia, stands as a glaring example of one of the world's most isolated and brutal authoritarian regimes. Despite its immense natural gas riches, this nation remains stuck in a time warp of totalitarian control, where any whisper of dissent is met with swift and brutal retaliation. The country's bizarre and oppressive dictatorship is fueled by an intoxicating cocktail of history, natural resources, and the whims of its despotic rulers. What's more, it's a regime that keeps getting worse, not better. In this video, we'll dive into Turkmenistan's grotesque human rights abuses, outlandish laws, economic corruption, forced labor policies, and the twisted hereditary system that keeps power in the hands of a select few. This is the disturbing reality of one of the last true totalitarian states in the world today. From Soviet slumber to dictatorial nightmare. Turkmenistan's authoritarian nightmare didn't happen overnight. It was birthed from the collapse of the Soviet Union. Before gaining independence in 1991, Turkmenistan was just another Soviet republic, isolated and controlled by Moscow. But when the USSR fell, a vacuum of power allowed the country's first president, Saparmurat Niyazov, to seize control. Niyazov didn't just take the reins. He transformed the country into a bizarre dictatorship. Unlike many post-Soviet states that sought reforms, Niyazov embraced a one-man rule, which quickly descended into a cult of personality and unchecked authority. Instead of democratizing, he doubled down on authoritarianism, controlling the country's vast natural gas resources to fund his regime and ensuring that his grip on power remained absolute. The seeds of Turkmenistan's extreme oppression were sown, and they've only grown more toxic over time. Niyazov's dictatorship, a cult of personality, gone wild. Saparmurat. Niyazov's rule was like something out of a dystopian novel, only it was real. Niyazov wasn't just the president. He was Turkmenbashi, or leader of all Turkmen, a title that essentially elevated him to godlike status. His personality cult was not just a political tool, it was the system. Niyazov controlled every facet of life in Turkmenistan, from the media and military to the education system. His face adorned everything, from billboards to currency, and his name was attached to everything, including months of the year and entire cities. It wasn't enough to be President. Niyazov became the central figure in every Turkmen's life, and the country's reality was warped to serve his ego. Niyazov didn't just control politics, he regulated culture. He banned things like ballet and circuses, deeming them decadent, and wrote a book, Runama, which was touted as the country's spiritual guide. It was mandatory reading in schools alongside the Quran. Under his iron rule, the country's wealth from natural gas was funneled into his pockets and those of his cronies. Meanwhile, the majority of citizens lived in squalor, with little access to basic needs. Even worse, the regime relied on forced labor to maintain its grip on the economy. The country's vast natural gas wealth only enriched the elite, while the rest of the population suffered. The dictatorship lives on, Berdimuhamedov's rule. After Niyazov's death in 2006, hopes for change in Turkmenistan quickly vanished. His successor, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, not only maintained Niyazov's authoritarian policies, but amplified them. Like his predecessor, Berdimuhamedov built a pervasive personality cult. His image dominates the country, appearing on billboards, in statues, and even on currency. Power remains tightly concentrated in his hands, and any challenge to his rule is swiftly crushed. Turkmenistan continues to operate as a surveillance state where every citizen's movements are monitored. The media serves solely as a tool to glorify the regime, with no room for independent journalism or critical voices. Dissent is not tolerated. Political opposition is silenced through imprisonment, torture, and exile, ensuring no meaningful resistance can arise. Political prisoners are common, and anyone deemed a threat to the regime faces severe punishment. The country remains an information black hole, cut off from the outside world and heavily censored. With no space for free thought or open dialogue, Turkmenistan under Berdimuhamedov is, if anything, a more tightly controlled version of the oppressive system Niyazov built. The regime has created a stifling atmosphere where even the slightest deviation from state-sanctioned views is met with brutal consequences. Laws that defy logic, eccentric, outrageous, and absurd. What truly sets Turkmenistan apart from other authoritarian states is the sheer absurdity of its laws. The government has made a habit of implementing irrational, bizarre laws designed to control the populace at a microscopic level. For instance, men are forbidden from having long hair or beards, which the regime deems un-Turkmen. If you think that sounds crazy, just wait. The regime has also banned the color black in clothing, claiming it's a threat to the national identity. Public internet use is tightly controlled, with access restricted to a select few. The average citizen has no way of connecting to the outside world, and social media? Completely blocked. Turkmenistan's government has perfected the art of isolation, both physically and mentally. Human rights abuses, forced labor, torture, and disappearances. Turkmenistan's human rights record reads like a horror story. Forced labor is rampant, particularly in the cotton industry. Every year, hundreds of thousands of citizens, including children, are forced into grueling labor under the harsh sun, working long hours with little to no pay. Teachers, doctors, and even children are sent to the fields as part of the regime's annual forced labor campaign. Those who try to resist or speak out are often tortured or imprisoned without trial. Arbitrary detention, forced confessions, and torture are routine. Political dissidents disappear without a trace, and their families are left to wonder whether they will ever return. The world's human rights organizations, like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, have repeatedly documented these abuses. Yet, nothing changes. The regime's grip on power is so tight that even the international community's condemnation seems to have little effect. Turkmenistan remains one of the worst human rights violators on the planet, and it shows no sign of improving. Economic corruption. A nation built on gas, but still poor. Despite having some of the largest natural gas reserves in the world, Turkmenistan remains one of the poorest nations on Earth. The regime's heavy dependence on natural gas has allowed a small elite to amass enormous wealth, but the vast majority of the population lives in dire poverty. The government tightly controls the economy, with resources distributed based on political loyalty rather than need. As a result, basic services like education and healthcare are severely underfunded, leaving ordinary citizens without adequate support. Corruption is rampant at all levels of government, with officials siphoning off wealth from the natural gas industry. This vast accumulation of wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority of Turkmens struggle to survive on minimal wages and face widespread poverty. Despite the country's immense natural resources, the benefits of these reserves are largely inaccessible to the general population, who are excluded from any meaningful economic opportunity. The regime's wealth is built on the exploitation of both the country's natural resources and its people. As the elite thrive, the rest of the population is left to cope with a crumbling economy, inadequate infrastructure, and systemic inequality that ensures the rich get richer while the poor remain trapped in poverty. Forced labor, the backbone of the dictatorship. Forced labor is not just a troubling byproduct of Turkmenistan's economy, it is a vital pillar that holds up the entire regime. Every year, hundreds of thousands of citizens are forcibly sent to the cotton fields, where they endure grueling hours under harsh conditions. The cotton industry, a cornerstone of the country's economic structure, relies heavily on this coerced workforce to remain operational. Any attempts to resist or challenge the system are swiftly and violently crushed. Dissidents and those who speak out against the regime are punished severely, facing imprisonment, torture, or even worse. This brutal exploitation of the population is essential to the functioning of Turkmenistan's economy, as the government uses forced labor not only to maintain its grip on power, but also to sustain its wealth. The regime's continued survival hinges on keeping this oppressive system intact, ensuring the status quo remains unchallenged. Hereditary power. A dynasty in the making. Turkmenistan is one of the few places on Earth where power is passed down, not through elections or merit, but as if it were a family heirloom, safeguarded and protected from any outside interference. When Sapir Murat Niyazov, the country's longtime authoritarian ruler, passed away in 2006, the transition of power did not involve the people, a democratic process, or even a semblance of competition. Instead, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, a close ally and former health minister, was simply chosen to take the reins, cementing the nation's status as a dictatorship where leadership is neither earned nor contested. It is inherited. This dynastic rule ensures that any hopes for meaningful political change are extinguished before they can even begin. The regime operates with absolute control, ensuring that no opposition can arise, no political discourse can flourish, and no reformist movement can take root. Anyone who dares to challenge the status quo is swiftly silenced, whether through imprisonment, exile, or more insidious means of suppression. Alternative leadership is not just discouraged, it is eradicated before it can pose a threat. For ordinary Turkmen citizens, this system represents a relentless cycle of repression. Without political parties, independent media, or an open civic space, there is no avenue for expression, no forum for grievances, and no mechanism for change. The government operates with impunity, untouched by protests or public opinion, rendering the people utterly powerless against the will of the ruling elite. As long as the regime maintains its iron grip, democracy remains an impossibility, and the dream of reform remains just that, a dream. The hereditary succession of power guarantees that the current authoritarian rule will persist for generations, ensuring that the people remain trapped under an unyielding system of oppression with no way out. A bleak future. Turkmenistan's fate is sealed. With an unchallenged ruling family, a system designed to perpetuate dictatorship, and a government that ruthlessly crushes any form of dissent, Turkmenistan's future appears to be locked in a never-ending cycle of repression. Unlike many authoritarian regimes that at least pretend to allow opposition parties or independent voices, Turkmenistan makes no such effort. The country functions as an isolated police state, where every aspect of life is tightly controlled, and any criticism of the leadership is met with severe consequences. Despite being one of the world's most resource-rich nations, thanks to its vast reserves of natural gas, this wealth does not translate into prosperity for the majority of its people. Instead, it serves as a tool for the regime to maintain power, enriching a small circle of elites who remain fiercely loyal to the dictatorship in exchange for wealth and privileges. The broader population, however, sees little benefit, as economic mismanagement, strict state controls, and widespread corruption keep most citizens in a state of poverty and dependence. Turkmenistan remains one of the last truly totalitarian states in the modern world, a relic of an era where absolute power reigned unchecked. In a world that has largely moved toward democratic governance and political accountability, Turkmenistan stands as an anomaly, a grim reminder of what happens when a single family holds all the power and the people are reduced to mere subjects in their ruler's grand design. As long as the current system remains in place, change is not just unlikely, it is impossible. Without political opposition, independent media, or civil society, there's no force capable of challenging the dictatorship. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most secretive and authoritarian regimes. Stay informed, and we'll see you in the next one.